Hello, hello, my name is Diva and I'm a Libra, hence Diva the Libra, and it's time to be a little bit of a hater. A lot of these bookish topics, trends, subjects that I want left in 24, I recognize are very arbitrary, but I still want to get them off my chest. First, what I feel are unoriginal or unimaginative illustrated covers for romance books. And note how I didn't say that I dislike all illustrated or cartoon covers for romance books, because I don't dislike all of them. I turned on the light back there to give myself some more. Because first, I want to say, as long as the cover does what it's supposed to do for me, which is that it's eye-catching, it makes me interested in reading the book, or if it in some way catches my attention, it does its job. I don't really inherently care if it's cartoon or illustrated. I know what the kind of style people don't like, but to me that doesn't necessarily matter. What I am bothered by is when a cover does a book a huge disservice by offering really nothing for it. I also want to say I completely understand why consumers and readers alike don't really enjoy this illustrated cartoon cover trend that's going on right now for adult contemporary romance, but maybe because I've seen so many cover trends across different genres, across different age ranges, come in and out of fashion depending on what is in fashion currently. I feel like this is maybe a tinfoil hat conspiracy. I give this being at the helm of contemporary romance maybe the next 2 to 3 years. I could be completely wrong though. Okay, now follow me here. In the summer of 2019, I remember distinctly because it was the summer of my freshman year of college when I had the opportunity to intern in the publishing industry, where the book Red, White, and Royal Blue was boosting in popularity. Everybody wanted to get their hands on it. Everybody wanted to read it. Everybody wanted to see what the buzz was about. Now think about the cover of Red, White, and Royal Blue, and think about the covers of a lot of maybe romance books that you've seen recently. This is not me exactly saying that when one book becomes really popular, everybody is immediately going to follow the trend. However, around the time that Red, White, and Royal Blue started boosting in popularity, that is also around the time that books like Beach Read and the Brown Sisters series also started really blowing up on social media. And I say those two books and series specifically because in my mind's eye, Red, White, and Royal Blue, Beach Read, and the Brown Sisters series all have this kind of very specific-ish illustrated cartoon cover that I'm not necessarily in love with, but it works for those books because for me, since it was the first time I saw those, it felt like they were setting the first of their trend. Now anything else I see like it reminds me of those books, which is the intention though, even though I don't like it. When I see those covers, I think, oh, okay, this is going to be a romance book, which is the intention of having that cover. I now feel like I'm kind of defending it, which is weird because this video is about things I want to see left in 2024. I mostly wanted to start this off to say, I feel like a lot of people often ask, where did this come from? Where did these illustrated, I hate this, why did it start? It's because before 2019, 2018, there was a new cover trend that was going on. People also disliked it. There will always be kind of this was better, this nostalgia, but I feel when a new cover comes around, give it 5 to 6 years, people will look back on the illustrated ones and be God, I kind of miss when we had variety. Do you understand what I mean? And so to kind of get back to my original point, I was trying to explain why I understand why these covers are popular and why I don't inherently dislike them. What I don't like is when a cover does no work, it feels to actually draw me into the book. And I completely understand, as it also came as a shock to me a couple of years ago when I learned that in traditional publishing, more often than not, unless an author has some kind of pull or longevity, they do not get to choose their cover. So this is not me poking at them. And I also understand on the other side, artists who are commissioned to do these covers, they're usually given very specific instructions. But there is something that particularly, especially for a debut author, when I see their book in a bookstore and I just get curious enough to read the back, and I'm if I wasn't just simply curious enough to flip this book over, your cover was not eye-catching at all. I do think subjectively that illustrated covers can be really fun and eye-catching and just something a little bit different. One of my favorite covers that I've seen this year, which makes me want to read the book, is this romance called The Friendship Study. I'm not really in love with the placement of the hand on this, but I also like the way that it depicts that this book has some kind of heat, or there more than likely is going to be sex in this. And to my last point, makes me think about a point that I wanted to touch on, is how particularly sexless some books that are full of smut weirdly feel. Which is to say, I didn't expect a book just because it has a couple open door sex scenes or it's erotic to have the characters doing crazy stuff on the cover, but I do think there is a certain sanitization that's happening across a lot of romance book covers that I'm just particularly not in love with. What also kind of kills me is when a cover is revamped with this kind of uninteresting or lackluster art style as I see it. A perfect example, unfortunately, is a book that I saw a while ago, I Kiss Sarah Wheeler, it has gotten a new cover that I just doesn't do it any favors, and I think that's what I don't really particularly like to see, and I subjectively just feel like this isn't really bringing anything new or interesting to the table. Now moving away from covers because I talked about that longer than I thought I would. This is something I know is not going to stop because I see it happen every single year. I want to see very cyclical and non-nuanced conversations around anti-intellectualism and audiobooks aren't reading in bookish spaces. Let's leave that in 2024. And to the anti-intellectualism conversation, I do think it is one that should be had. Do not get me wrong. I do think there is a lot of cause for concern, especially the way that people talk about skipping whole paragraphs in books. But I also think that this is a conversation where people often like to look down upon others and kind of like point fingers. I also think a lot of people willfully look away from the ways in which COVID had a really big impact on education. And I feel like that does need to be brought in the discussion if we're going to be talking about the ways in which younger generations especially aren't really critically engaging with the work that they're reading anymore. Another note that I want to add to like really cyclical conversations I don't want to see anymore, how at the end of the year, like clockwork, somebody will say that they read more than like 50 or like 100 plus books, and people will find like any way to be upset at that. Guys, let's be happy. Like, that is such a non-issue to me. It's also really silly but interesting to me how people think that people are incapable of reading a lot in a year. I think this conversation is rooted in a lot of envy and jealousy because a lot of people feel personally embarrassed or like flack placed upon them because they didn't read as much. But like, one, if you're reading, you're reading. Like, be proud of your own accomplishments. Like, don't try to compare yourself to other people. But also this idea that like people really sincerely believe that like people cannot be reading a lot in a year. Like, if reading is somebody's like favorite hobby or what they do in their free time, it makes complete sense they can be reading a lot. Like, let's leave that inane conversation in 2024, please. It's even happening like right now as I'm making this video. And next, the Romantasy genre. And of course, it comes with caveats. I do not want to leave the whole Romantasy genre in 2024, but I do feel like, one being that it's not really a new genre within itself, but it being called Romantasy is new and it being like labeled as such, it really boomed in popularity in 2024. We can say this for a lot of different genres, but maybe because I have not been personally really impressed, which is a subjective thing, of course, by any Romantasy that I've picked up. The world building just feels particularly weak. The characterization, for all that I talked about in my last video, kind of contemporary romance being really built around like tropes and the tropification, like the ways in which we see that, I do feel like Romantasy is a genre that's also really falling into this trap where it's very obvious to me when like he pushed like a knife against her throat has been like pigeonholed to do a scene and doesn't really fit elsewhere. I do really want something else for the genre. And if anybody has any really good Romantasy recs though, like recommend them to me because I have not fallen in love with one yet, unfortunately. This is a short one. I really don't have much to say about it, but books being promoted as like, this is like if A met B, or like if C met D, mind you, these letters being like other comparable books, I don't think this is like a bad marketing tool. I actually think it's a very good one because if I read a book a while ago and then I see a new book being compared to it and I liked that book, of course I'm going to try to pick up the new book. But I do think there's something particularly disingenuous or sometimes what feels like outright false where the book is being compared to, it doesn't even have like a semblance. And that's the thing. I don't expect every book that a book is being compared to be like a carbon copy. That would make anybody like raise their eyebrows. But if you say like this is like Dark Academia meets like Gossip Girl, I'm going to expect like some semblance of that, you understand? That point also made me think of something else though, a kind of abstract, not a genre, but maybe a subgenre word that I feel like is being thrown around a lot, but every time I read one, it feels like it's being presented as something very different, so I guess maybe I can't get an assertion on it, which is Dark Academia. Dark Academia is starting to feel like a little bit of a strange catch-all for a lot of subjects and topic matters that don't necessarily always feel like they point to Dark Academia. On one hand, I always think of it as like gothic horror or like southern gothic horror or like murder happens at like boarding school, but I feel like sometimes that phrase is just like thrown around more often than not because it's been popular as far back as like Templar days, and like you see it, you become interested, like, ooh, Dark Academia, it sounds smart. This is not me being like the fun police, but I do think we need to put like a little bit more of a pin on like what is Dark Academia. Next, everybody is different, but people thinking it's like a personal failing in the sort to DNF a book. Put that book down. Life is too short, and that's coming from a perfectionist. The only copy of a special edition I've ever bought in my life was the second novel of Divergent, as you guys have seen on my shelves. But something I want to leave in the past are like special editions of books not including anything particularly special about them. Like from what I've seen sometimes, like it's not a new like hardcover, the pages aren't like sprayed or anything. It doesn't include like any new like bonus chapters or content. It usually will include like one new chapter. It should not be republished for like a special edition for that. Like I think while special editions like aren't my cup of tea, to be particularly honest, I think they're really cool and I will always like marvel at one. I do think this is a matter of people trying to like take advantage of that aspect of knowing people, like there's a consumer base for it and trying to take advantage of that. The framing of reading as this particularly expensive hobby, and like of course there's like nuance to this. I understand that paperbacks are $20. I understand that hardcovers are like $30 nowadays, which is like ludicrous. But I say this more to say that like I do think there's a certain, we can talk about like the aestheticness of reading and get into that conversation. But because of that, I feel like people look to the library very much as like a and I'm being dramatic, but I do feel like more often than not, people kind of see it as lesser than. And don't get me wrong, when I was younger, I had a mixed bag relationship with the library because I loved them, but they didn't often have like the new books that I wanted, and so I would like go to Barnes & Noble and like read in the stacks. But I do think in general of like, if you want a book that's been out for a while and you know it's at your library, you think that they can get it for you. I feel like I've been like the library's biggest advocate. Like as much as I love like browsing the bookstores and like going to bookstores and exploring them, I also think the library can be like a great resource. And I think a lot of people sometimes I feel like will say like the library doesn't have what I want, and I don't think they're like lying or anything, but I think a lot of people also just don't want to admit to themselves that they just don't think going to the library is like cool. I feel like this maybe like when I was a little bit younger, like really feeling like I needed to own a book if I was going to read it. But there's a certain relief in knowing like, oh my god, like I borrowed this book from the library and I hated it. She's going right back to the library. Like, there's always that gamble with buying a book if you're really going to, like, love it or enjoy it or not. But there's particularly something really nice about reading a book from the library, being like, oh my god, I really liked you, going to the bookstore and then getting it and being like, you're coming home with me. You know what I mean? I feel like I forgot my glasses were on my head and they've been, like, tilting this whole conversation. I probably looked crazy. But anyhow, I think that's it for now. If I was talking about the romance genre, like, specifically as a big romance reader, I feel like I could get, like, on some more like niche topics, but I'm gonna leave it there for now. Let me know if there's any bookish things that you want to be left in 2024. Let's talk, let's chat as always, and thank you for tuning in.